What about you? Very welcome. And as always, my thanks to my Patreon friends. God bless you, and your support is greatly appreciated. Now. I finished my annual tour last Saturday night in the Ardouin Theatre in Enniskillen. Now, my thanks to all of you who came to see the show. Especially thanks goes out to my friend Damien McParland, who acted as my chauffeur on the night due to a wee health issue I'd experienced earlier in the week. But more of that interesting story later on. Now, along with my good friend Terry McHugh, we played during this tour to thousands of you in 15 venues. We've travelled 1,157 miles, covering the whole of the province from Ballycastle in the north, Portaferry in the east, Enniskillen to the west, and Newry to the south. Now, as always, a special shout out goes to Brian and Sean Boyle at Festival Productions for putting on a flawless tour, with special mention to Chris Madden, who always goes above and beyond to ensure all I have to do is walk out on the stage and talk nonsense. Thanks also to my long-suffering agent, David Hull, who should get a medal for having to deal with an ADHD lunatic such as myself. Now, of course, I do not forget all of you kind people who bought tickets to come along and see the show. I'm especially heartened that some of you are now veterans, having attended every year for nearly a decade, such as these lovely ladies who I met in Enniskillen. God bless them, God bless them. And it's lovely that at least half the audience are newcomers who I hope enjoy the show and will return. God willing and health permitting, I'll see you all again from December 2025 into February 2026, where once again I will be excoriating the powerful and informing on my own many peculiarities. Now, if in the interim you'd care to keep up with the madness, then consider joining my Patreon account, where for only £5 a month, I'll be providing a breakdown of the weekly goings-on in this wee part of the world and further afield. Along with the usual weekly roundup, I will soon be chatting with a variety of local people, including the great, the good, and everyone in between. So again, thanks to all of you who came to see the shows and you left lovely comments on anti-social media. It means a lot. Cheers. My annual tour this year was a bit more of a challenge this time round due to the recurrence of an old back injury and a second incident of transient ischemia attack, or TIA, or mini stroke, or what I've renamed a brain fart. Now, I blame Terry McHugh, who haven't had too many strokes and who I have named Two-Stroke Terry. Well, I believe he's infected me. I believe that wee bastard infected me. But joking aside, my thingamajigs thankfully weren't as serious as Terry's. But after having the first one, I was advised by doctors that if I had any similar symptoms, I should immediately go to the A&E. And I had that happen on Wednesday the 19th of last month, when once again, I suddenly felt a sense of discombobulation. I knew it was time to head for the emergency department. Now, I arrived and I was triaged immediately at about 6:30 in the afternoon. Little did I know then that when I took my seat back out in the waiting area, in the reception area, I'd still be there 19 hours. Do you hear me? 19 hours later. Now, I've been one of those people who's regularly pointed out that our health workers are in no way to blame. And I continue to hold that opinion. Indeed, I wonder how they cope, having seen up close what they face on a day-to-day basis. But somebody is to blame for the systemic rundown of our NHS, and I am convinced that a decision has been taken at the highest levels of government to kill the health service. Now, from the disaster of the Thatcher administration up until today, our NHS has been underfunded to a point where people now face the stark choice of either paying for healthcare or joining a waiting list, a never-ending waiting list for treatment. Now, as of today, as of this Sunday, there are 401,200 people in Northern Ireland waiting for a first outpatient appointment, with nearly 50% of those people having waited for more than a year. Now, the answer to this, if it ever comes, rests with Westminster, not with the Assembly. And as our influence is severely limited in that place, we must start to look at how we can best use the limited services and resources we have available. So I want to talk about what I saw during my time in an A&E. And I'm not going to mention which hospital I was in, as these problems aren't restricted to any particular hospital. They're right across the NHS. Now, there is no doubt that our A&E departments have become a pinch point in the delivery of timely healthcare, and many factors contribute to that reality. The rundown of other social care services have had a domino effect, resulting in our A&E departments being swamped by people who simply shouldn't be there. The difficulties patients experience in seeing their GPs has led many to misuse A&E departments as their first port of call when seeking medical help. What I also observed during the 19 hours was how the closing of services such as the Welcome Centre in Belfast, which deals with the homeless, has resulted in rough sleepers now using A&E departments as a warm place to spend the night. And our lack of a safe consumption room for drug users means many now use A&E departments as a safe place to inject, knowing that if they overdose, medical care is immediately available. I saw syringes in the toilet when I was there and the night I was there, and this is not unusual. Indeed, on the night I was in A&E, I guess only around half the people in that waiting room had a legitimate reason to be there. Now, one solution could be more resources being spent on phlebotomy or blood testing. Why, you may ask? Well, we can't or should not deny anyone, I don't care, homeless or drug users, whoever, we cannot deny people the right to attend A&E, but we could quickly weed out those who don't have a legitimate illness if A&E departments had access to quicker blood testing. It took 10 hours for the results of my bloods to come back, and I learned this is not unusual, with 8 hours being the norm on most nights. This is now common knowledge. So those gaming the system know all they need do is go to A&E, have bloods taken for whatever illness they've made up, and they have a ticket to stay for the rest of the night. And this impacts on genuine patients who are left waiting for what could be life-saving treatment. So we need to invest in quicker blood testing. I don't know which phlebotomy unit is used at night. My guess would be the samples are sent to the RVH. And if that is the case, then there is a clear need to increase capacity for staff to test at that unit. I had to wait 14 hours from being first seen until another doctor saw me. I then had to go for a scan and faced another 5-hour wait for that scan to be signed off by a consultant. Now, my subsequent treatment has been brilliant. I've been seen in the hospital and I'm waiting for another scan. Now, one final observation from my long night involves the treatment of those who are unfortunate enough to have drug issues. I would suggest that only under the most extreme circumstances should individuals with drug problems be given prescriptions for barbiturates in our A&E departments. As a comic, I'm a professional people watcher, and during my 19-hour incarceration in the A&E department, I had the opportunity to observe a group of unfortunate young men with drug issues. And while I have no issue at all in recognizing that they too are sick and need help, their reasons for attending that unit were not to seek help, but rather to obtain drugs. I observed one particular individual who behaved like a hyena stalking a herd of wildebeest, only in his case, his prey were the overworked doctors doing their absolute best to treat very ill patients. He had what I believed was a well-rehearsed sob story about being mugged and robbed. I listened as he, with the skill of only an addict could do, desperate for a fix, harried and harassed the staff until he managed to get his prescription for Valium. I was sitting there and heard the discussion between him and the doctor. The addict asked, "Doctor, are you giving me Valium?" "Doctor, yes." He asked, "Are the 5s or 2s?" "Doctor, they're 2s." He says, "Well, how many are you giving me?" Doctor says, 2 twice a day. Now, I am in no way blaming that doctor. I was told only 2 doctors were on duty that night. So I understand why he made the decision to give the addict what he wanted just to get rid of him so he could return to treat his very ill patients. And to those who will argue, I don't know all the facts, I agree. But I do know what I saw. I witnessed an A&E department which teetered on the brink of chaos, with security having to physically move one disruptive person out of the unit while I sat there. Now, our new health minister, Mike Nesbitt, may already have done this. But if he hasn't, I'd suggest he spends a night in one of our A&E departments. He should talk to the patients, talk to the staff, and get a real feel for the pressures under which that staff are being forced to work. And I'm not expecting miracles, but I do believe if we shorten the time it takes for blood tests, then that alone could have a real impact on waiting times and act as a way to filter out those with no genuine reasons to be in the A&E departments. In conclusion, I have to admit to being more than a little pissed about our health service. You see, I was born in 1961. I'm a member of Generation X. And mine will be the first generation who will have spent their whole lives playing the game straight, paying into the system via taxation and national insurance contributions, who'll receive nothing in return, as the health service we were promised has been allowed to wither and die just when we reach an age when we need it most. There was a bit of a hiccup with the announcement of the Assembly's programme for government during the week, resulting in it having to be delayed for a day. Well, come on now. That's understandable, considering they've only had 10 years to come up with one. Hey! Yes, it's been a decade since a Northern Ireland Assembly has been able to lay out their intentions going forward. Now, for most of that time, governing was left in the hands of unelected civil servants. That probably wasn't a bad thing. They'd probably done a better job. If this week has proved one thing, it is that for once, we aren't the most dysfunctional democracy in the world, with that title now firmly in the hands of the good old US of A. The Donald's been at his work again. Yeah, him and his bitch Vice President Vance staged a disgraceful ambush of visiting Ukrainian President Valenski in the Oval Office. Now here's a small clip of what will go down as one of the most ignominious days in the history of the US of A.
You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Then count one.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems? Bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's backed you far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
Today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Even the shenanigans of President Clinton and Miss Lewinsky in the Oval Office pale into insignificance compared to the disgraceful bullying of Trump and Vance of the Ukrainian leader. They even mocked Valenski's decision not to wear a suit. And this started right from the moment Zelensky arrived. Trump met him at the door of the White House and said, "Oh, look, he's all dressed up," which makes me convinced, as I said at the time, this was a well rehearsed and planned ambush. But I do wonder what the likes of Trump would have said if he'd met Churchill. Because this is what Churchill wore when he visited the White House during the Second World War. For there are clear comparisons between Churchill and Zelensky. Both faced dictators using violence to grab land. Indeed, US public opinion wasn't dissimilar then to now, with many Americans arguing against the country becoming involved in the Second World War as they've used it as a European conflict and were still stung after the First World War. The one massive difference, of course, was the presidents in power then and now. During the Second World War, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had just led his country out of the Great Depression, went on to bravely face down fascism in both Europe and Japan. Today, we have a fat, bronzed-faced, spoilt brat who appears to be in awe of Europe's newest dictator, Vladimir Putin. Because make no mistake, the country which previously was the sword carrier of freedom and democracy belittled a wartime ally and spouted pro-Russian propaganda, losing that standing. Now, if we could have seen Putin in the Kremlin watching what was going on, this is probably what we would have seen.
You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look, if you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you.
Trump even accused Valenski of being the dictator because he hadn't held elections since the start of the war with Russia. This just proves that man's complete lack of a basic knowledge of history, as Winston Churchill did exactly the same, cancelling an election in 1940 due to the ongoing war with Germany. Indeed, I'd argue it's Trump himself who is showing dictatorial inclinations, as he intimates now that 2 terms, the maximum allowed under the US Constitution, may not be enough for the Donald.
No, I won't be happy the next time. Should I run again? You tell me. There's your controversy right there.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer had a much easier meeting with Trump earlier in the week, though this is probably down to the fact that he took on board the input of psychiatrists. I'm convinced that he had talked to psychiatrists before he travelled across the Atlantic, and they would have probably identified Trump for what he is, a classic narcissist, and advised the Prime Minister that the best approach would have been to offer ebullient praise of the genius that was the president and bring gifts, always bring gifts. In the case of Starmer, the gift took the shape of pimping out Prince King Charles, offering Trump a state visit to Balmoral. Trump said that the king was a beautiful man. I don't think anyone else has ever said that. It'll be interesting to see what the king thinks. I'd love to be a fly on that wall. Now, even though Trump warmly accepted Starmer's invitation, still he forced Starmer, as he will force all European leaders, to bow to his demand that they increase spending on defence by 2.5% of their GDP. And where will this money come from? Social care, education, infrastructure, and of course the NHS. Now, I've never been a conspiracy theorist, but the phrase which jumps to mind is military-industrial complex. This term was coined by Dwight D. Eisenhower in his farewell address as president in 1961. Speaking about the then growing arms race with the USSR, Eisenhower was worried that the increase in defense spending was having a destabilizing effect on the very fabric of US government and society. He said, and I quote, "Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved, so is the very structure of our society. In the Council of Government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for disaster of misplaced power and will persists." Now, President Eisenhower was uniquely placed and qualified to make those judgments, having been Commander-in-Chief of the US military during World War II. The problem today is not only do we have a US president ignorant of not only US history, but also a US electorate ignorant of world history. As for the military-industrial complex, well, the Pentagon has always sat right at the gates of power. But now, industry in the shape of the Elon Musk is at the heart of decision-making. He's on the board, even though no one cast a vote for Elon Musk. And as Musk bleeds, and he will bleed the US public purse of billions to fund his hobby of spaceships and ludicrous dreams of interplanetary travel to Mars, millions of Americans will go hungry and homeless while the top 1%, such as Musk, grow ever richer. Considering all this, of course, the decision of Sinn Féin Alliance and the SDLP to boycott this year's St. Patrick's Day celebrations in the White House now look very wise. We can but wonder how embarrassed DUP leader Emma Little Bengelli must be, as she's the only local politician who's agreed to bow a knee to the Donald and go kiss his shamrock on the 17th of March. The conflict in the Middle East continues, even though the IDF has stopped slaughtering innocent civilians with their bombs. They recently moved 40,000 Palestinians out of their homes, saying that they would not be allowed to return. That's, by the way, called ethnic cleansing. And as that unfurls and continues, sadly, Pope Francis languishes in a hospital bed in Rome, suffering breathing issues. And while the faithful of the world prayed for the Pope's prompt recovery, one Zionist rabbi called Shmuley, well, he had a different agenda. He got in a plane to travel to see the Pope in person, and this was his reason for doing so.
So I'm praying for Pope Francis, and I'm on a trip going to Europe, God willing, where we will have meetings at the Vatican. I'm very grateful to my very dear friend Gary Cobb, through whom I met Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, and I'm praying for Pope Francis' welfare. It is my sincere hope that Pope Francis will recover and that he will issue a statement that we have long asked of him, that affirms, based on irrefutable biblical truths, that God gave the land of Israel, the Holy Land, to the Jewish people, the children of Israel, as a material inheritance.
No, I don't mock anybody's faith. I just don't do that. I don't believe in doing that. I've read a fair bit of the Bible. I have to admit, I prefer the New Testament to the Old Testament, which Shmuley is basing his assertions on. I found that to be very violent, too much blood and violence, too much rape and pillage, too much slavery, too much violence. I think the sequel, I think that's why God decided to have a sequel to that. And I think a bit like The Godfather, I prefer the second version. I prefer the one with the Jesus boy in it. I prefer that one. But anyway, I can imagine if Shmuley was fortunate enough to get into the hospital. Imagine by a miracle he got up to be beside the Pope's bed. And imagine he had laid out his demand that the Pope recognize Israel's right in the Bible to claim that land. And then he just sat and listened for what the Pope would say. And I think it would play out something like this. The Pope would listen patiently to what Shmuley had said. And then he would slowly remove his oxygen mask and beckon the rabbi closer. And when Rabbi Shmuley was almost beside the Pope's face, the Pope would quietly whisper, "Would you ever Fuck off.
I know. There's no need for that. Hey, there was no need for that, like. There was no need for that.